Hello everybody and welcome to this particular slide deck on how to make things accessible. I am obviously more concentrating on a slide deck, but this can actually work for other applications that you might be using. You will probably notice that I'm not using the full screen situation, and there is method in my madness because I want you to be able to see me tabbing through each slide. So let's go. Okay. Right, so the key elements for actually making something accessible, such as web pages, Excel, Word documents, and especially slide decks as we're dealing this time, is one is good contrast, another is optimizing the screen reader, which is the speech software that visually impaired and blind people use, and the third being navigation. Could you move through your slide deck without using a mouse? These are things I've considered when I've done a lot of testing on various applications for accessibility and, you know, speaking at show and tell, etc. Okay, next slide then. So yeah, contrast and clarity. This is more about text and backgrounds. So basically consider the foreground and the background of the text that you're using. Muted colours may seem romantic, but they're not very practical to an assistive technology user. Saying that, it doesn't mean to say you have to be entirely clinical about the situation. So here we've got a nice, well, in a way, a good bad example. That's kind of golden text on a, or sort of coloured text on a golden background that's hardly visible at all. A good example is like what you've got here is kind of yellow thick text on a black background. Another bad example here is this particular, can't even tell what that is, that's so bad. A good example, again, you can use gradient, which will help in keeping the contrast of your colours. And again, another good example, softer colour gradient as well, etc. Many assistive technology users use reverse video colour filters when they're reading particular screens. So instead of having a black font on a white background, it can be flipped over to a white font on a black background. Sometimes if there's some colour schemes that are really middly, then they have to sort of switch between one and the other for the same application or even the same page that they're on, which obviously can slow down the processes. One tip to remember here is, one, garish and inaccessible is not good. Palatable and inaccessible is not good. Garish and accessible is good, and palatable and accessible is obviously good for everybody. So here you've got an example of two screens. This particular one here, where you've got what was basically a sort of like a previous slide deck on a normal view, if you like, and then the next one being how it would look with reverse video. So you can probably see in a couple of cases there that neither polarity looks any good for reading some of those fonts because of the terrible colour scheme. So let's move on to the next slide then. In your own time, computer. Yes, so contrast and colours. Okay, so primary colours in regards to paint are red, yellow and blue. And in regards to light and what you're using on your screen, and I've never understood why this is, but it's red, green and blue. So you might have heard the term RGB used. It was in the days of the first colour monitors. Also, just to note when presenting, if you're talking about these different colours, they are opposite to each other in reverse video, so just a kind of a mental note to possibly get used to in time. So lots of presentations use a RAG analysis. So instead of red, amber and green, a RAG analysis on reverse video is going to look like cyan, blue and purple respectively. Black or white text is best on these kind of backgrounds or any kind of backgrounds. Sometimes the colours are a bit compromised when you get to the middling colours. So the actual colour inversions are black inverts to white, blue inverts to yellow, red inverts to cyan, purple inverts to green, green inverts to purple, cyan inverts to red, yellow inverts to blue, and of course white inverts to black. Also to note what I've done there with the green, because green in this case is quite a middling colour, so there's probably one font that's slightly better, marginally better than the other in regards to the colour when it comes to contrast. So that's just to be aware of. Okay, now we're talking contrast and clarity again, but this is about the fonts themselves. So yeah, good contrast is okay, but provided fonts are easy to read. Clearer fonts don't just mean making them big. Best to avoid fonts with serifs, like Times New Roman. Some fonts include in a drop-down list the term sans serif, which means they don't have serifs, without serifs. So, something I learnt a long time ago when I was on a minute writing course, it's better to take notes in pencil than it is actually taking notes in ballpoint, because eventually your hand or your arm is going to get more fatigued. So in modern terms, that's like saying writing in a gel pen instead of using a ballpoint is less exhausting for your hand and your arm. So similarly, reading fonts that are nice and clear without serifs is easier on the eye for anybody, whether fully sighted or otherwise, than reading lots of fonts that are more complex. So some fonts are probably too fancy to be used again, but there are some fun fonts that you could possibly get away with as long as you as long as you use them well, let's say. So here we go. Times New Roman. That is a font with serifs. You can see the little triangular bits and everything. Some organisations adopt an actual policy for what their minimum font is and size. So a lot of people go for Arial 12 as their minimum requirement, whether that be for slide decks, even for email correspondence, Word documents, etc. I have discovered recently it's called Arial and not Arial. I was quite surprised at that. I got pulled on it on an earlier presentation. Narrow fonts, probably best to avoid altogether. The Partially Sighted Society actually adopt a Arial black, I've done it again, Arial black, size 14 as a minimum. Avoid using brushstroke fonts basically, because they're really difficult to read for any assistive technology user. Even as headings, it's probably best to avoid in that situation. Okay, there are still some fun fonts without serifs that are quite good to be used, but again, like I said before, use these kind of wisely. Don't make them into small fonts if you're going to be using these kind of fun fonts like Comic Sans Serif here. Okay, so now we're moving on to optimising screen readers, and this is first of all is with pictures. Shapes containing text obviously gives a good description, but one footnote here is best to actually just add the text to the shape itself rather than having the shape and then putting a text box over the top of it, because that will become one tab navigational step extra, which you'll understand a bit more about a bit later on. But obviously if a picture is a key point of your presentation, then you will need a description so that a speech software user will be able to have the description read to themselves as they navigate through it. This can be achieved using something called alt text. So if I were using speech software here now and I've just navigated to this picture, it would give a description such as this. What are you laughing at? Okay, so how to actually achieve the alt text. This again is probably geared more to PowerPoint, but obviously there will be similar processes in similar applications. So you would do the right click, or the equivalent of right click, on the picture itself, select Format Picture from the menu, select the third icon across, and then down the left hand side you've got a series of tabs. So open the alt text tab. Two fields will appear, one called title and one called description. Best to, as a footnote here, the best thing is to actually populate both the title and the description with the same thing, because it seems that some assistive softwares read one of them and some assistive software read another. So just to be on the safe side, better that the assistive technology user hears it twice rather than not at all. Also, the right click can also be achieved by hitting the key that is just to the left of your right hand control key. So anyway, here we go. This is basically a picture of the slide, the picture being selected and the menu that pops up, and then the next one is just showing you the actual where the alt text will appear on the top right hand corner of your screen. Now then, okay, now we're talking about actually optimizing the screen reader but using navigation. Now you've noticed that I've been tabbing through this as we've gone along, and so what's happened here is what happens if you put a nice process flow together, but what most of us probably do is they'll get so far through our process flow and say, oh no, I've missed out a step here, so you'll insert another one, one shape in between two other shapes, and then move the shapes about, move the arrows about, etc. An assistive technology user won't be using a mouse, so they'll need to tab through the objects. And one way to ensure the tab order is correct is by using the selection pane, which will bring up a list of everything that's on your screen, and you can alter the tab order. Obviously, when you put objects in, they will appear in the order that they've been placed in the document rather than where they are in the document. So that's one thing to remember. Another way to do it is obviously to create an identical slide and then paste each section in, shapes and arrows included, in the correct order. But this is obviously going to be more painstaking, because then you're going to have to mess about with formatting again. And so yeah, to save yourself time, try to be a bit agile about this and build the, check the tab order as you go along. So here's a great example of what happens when a load of shapes have been put in seemingly at random, and we're an assistive technology user is trying to read through what is going on. So, right, what's happened here? Right, we've just tabbed to the new process flow, and where are we? Oh yes, once kettle has boiled, fill the cups. Right, so fair enough. We know it's something to do with making a drink, possibly. So we'll tab again. Where have we tabbed to now? We've tabbed to one of the arrows between steps 4 and 5. We just started with step 6. And we'll tab again. Where have we gone? We have now gone to step 1. Take empty kettle to tap. So, yeah, that's the next bit. Tab again. Turn on tap, good idea. Right, okay, we'll tab again, and what's happening now? Oh, where have we gone now? Oh yes, switch on power. Might be a bit of a stretch. Okay, so we'll tab again, plug in kettle. That tap's still running as well, and so yeah, might be a bit dangerous that. Okay, tab again, what we got now? We've got, oh yes, a tab with the big arrow is joining two of the processors together. Okay. And we'll tab again. What's happening now? Where are we gone? Lost it in his end. Oh yeah. Something joining the first process to the big arrow. Yeah, okay. And what's next? Oh, another arrow joining steps 1 and 2. Great, okay. What we got next? And another arrow joining steps 5 and 6. And we'll tab again. what we got now? Oh, joining steps 2 to steps 3. Okay, what's next? Another arrow, yeah, joining the big arrow to the second stage. And what we got next? We're tabbed again. Oh, we got a title. Ah, so now we know what this slide's all about. Okay, so we'll do the next one. Oh, and finally, turn off the tap. Yeah, so we've left that water running all that time. But yeah, I think you can see there's a point to be made about making sure that your tab order is correct. So again, try to be doing this as you're developing your process flow, rather than trying to painstakingly do it all at the end. Okay, so the next slide. This is how to get your tab order. So yeah, sort of relates to PowerPoint again, but it's going to be similar to other aspects. So you go to your home ribbon and you've got your sections along the bottom of that ribbon. So yeah, go to the editing, and where it says find and replace and select, you click the select button option, and as the drop down appears, you click selection pane. Now, a list of all your objects on that particular slide will appear. So if you click on the object itself, it will highlight in that list that appears on the top right hand corner, and then you can use the arrow keys that are there, arrow buttons should I say, to move those up and down. So the bottom of the list will always be the first thing that will be tabbed to. So hopefully in any case that's going to be the title of your slide basically. So yeah, so here we go. So I've tabbed to it now, look, and yes, these pictures have got alt text describing what they are. It's showing you where it appears on the file ribbon, and then obviously here is just showing you where the tab list appears, or the selection pane. Okay, screen readers and whiteboards. Yeah, these aren't ideal, but they do work. So it is possible for users of screen reader software to make use of the whiteboards, as in the when presentations are being shared and people are asked to put their input. Some good practice steps to follow so that the AST user can actually keep up with everyone else. One is basically advise all colleagues or non-assistive technology users to not use the top left-hand corner, because what will happen is the assistive technology user will be tabbing, without using the mouse again, to the speech bubble and then selecting it with either enter or space, which will create their text window to add. From that point in, they can obviously add in that corner. It's probably a good idea as well to make sure there's an alternative format that they can contact you with. So say if you're presenting this particular piece of work, you've got the whiteboard up, it's a bit like the conversation panel. An assistive technology user isn't going to keep up with that very easily. So basically have another option so that they can contact you via email rather than trying to use conversation box or even whiteboard. And again, because they might not be entirely sure of what to do with this, it is quite new to a lot of assistive technology users as well. Obviously Word and Excel and those kind of applications have been around for donkey's years. So also, just if the assistive technology user says they can't seem to navigate from their box of text to other people's box of text, then you can advise them to press escape, and that should do it. So whatever text they've entered there will still remain. So if they don't want it to appear, then they can just delete it. And yeah, it is possible that they can use a tab to navigate through the whole whiteboard to see what everybody else has said. The problem is obviously is that they're also going to end up navigating through the entire screen as well, so not just the whiteboard itself. So that's just something to be aware of. So yeah, it's just kind of a ropey example of people putting different names in different sections, etc. Okay, so the next slide. Similar sort of thing. This is to do with the when doing the voting tool. They can be used, but there are some best practice tips to possibly advise an assistive technology user when you're doing it, because again, it's fairly new stuff to a lot of assistive technology users. So what will happen is when the polling window comes up that you've created, the assistive user will have an additional conversations pane that should appear. When it does appear, where they are in the navigation, they will be on the X closing box. So definitely to advise them to tab away from that. And the screen reader will then let them tab through, reading what the question itself is, and then the radio buttons to press for what they agree. Once they're satisfied with that, then they can submit their vote like everyone else, although they have an extra step. So what they need to do is click the submit on that additional window, which will close, but then in the actual polling window itself, they will also need to navigate to done. So there's an additional step there. And again, just here's an example of it, of a voting tool and the additional conversation window that appears for assistive users. So just a few more tips to remember. The first one, basically this is to optimize the assistive technology user's experience so that they can literally participate at the same pace as everybody else in the event. So if you're organising an event, offer to send the slide deck to the assistive technology user prior to the event. Avoid sending slides in full screen mode, because currently that kind of cause havoc with assistive technology users and how their screens are navigated even when they've shut the slide deck down. So basically send it in this kind of format that you've seen here. Remember, they cannot navigate through a shared screen apart from obviously whiteboards and the voting aspect, but the rest of it is basically taking a video of someone else's screen, so they can't read what is being said there. So that's one reason why providing the slide deck prior to then is obviously very helpful. Also try to remember to announce the slide number that you're on so that the people can keep up as you're sharing it via Teams or whatever. If you're using slides that have text that appears step by step, remember this is not going to be necessarily any good for an assistive technology user to keep up. I've been through a lot of presentations, you know, it's been a full day event, face to face, and they're talking about the winners of this competition, that competition or the other, and they'll say, and the winner is, and then everybody starts cheering, and I'm like, yeah, what were they cheering for? Who won? You know, so yeah, we can't know that. It may even be worth sort of saying to the assistive user, right, there's going to be some winners announced, but keep it to yourself until the day, type of thing. That's one way of doing it. Another way, obviously, is by verbally announcing these additional steps as they appear. So, as I've said before, Teams has used a lot more of these kind of screen sharing, Zooms, etc. That it's better to have an alternative format that's not just the screen and the conversation window. If people want to contact you, then, you know, have an email ready so that because again, assistive technology users are not going to be able to keep up with the flow of the conversation, focusing their screen reader on that aspect whilst trying to listen to the rest of the conversation going as well, the actual human conversation. Pictorial competitions will obviously benefit from some decent description of what they are, using the alt text that we spoke of before. And the footnote, yeah, it is generally accepted that when slides are sent prior to the event, especially with Agile, things are going to change at the last minute, minor details are going to change at the last minute. So if you can keep a mental note of what's changed since you sent these slides out to assistive users, then just mention it on the day. A few more tips about being succinct, especially for process flows, etc. Is it really necessary that an entire cramped, compact process flow should appear on one slide? Could it be broken down onto separate slides? I know sometimes people are, when people are feeding into different conferences where each delegate's only allowed so many slides, is it possible to be able to highlight the key areas only and describe what it's for. Okay, keep lines and arrows reasonably thick and again with a good contrast. If your objects have specific colour coding, try to maintain the contrast between the text, etc., and the background. Don't make the colours too faint, but you can probably use gradients that work around the outside edges of a shape and then with the text in the middle. Accessible process flows can be done within Word documents, so it's a bit like when you get a form when you're filling out an application. If you said yes to question 6, go to page 7, that kind of thing can work as an accessible process flow. Using the bookmark facility. If you need to use pie charts or graphs, put a brief description of what it represents and then the point which you're actually trying to make on that particular picture. So yeah, there's a French harpsichord. If you've got any questions, please feel free to leave them below or get into contact with me if you've got my details anyway. So yeah, that's the end of the presentation and I hope it's been useful.